This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for April 23rd through the 29th. On this week's show, we have an iconic Ramones album, an iconic nightclub, Studio 54, the iconic festival meltdown that was Fyre Fest, and a bunch of icons, all of whom not only shaped the music industry, but also the world. "1976 was an interesting year in American history. The country was celebrating its bicentennial. President Gerald Ford was locked in a presidential election race with the ex-governor of the state of Georgia. That would be Jimmy Carter. The country was dealing with the end of the Vietnam War and the troops coming home in 1975. It was also still dealing with the ramifications of a complete lack of trust in government due to the Watergate scandal and the resignation of President Richard Nixon only 2 years earlier. Overseas in Britain, a rebellious sound was beginning to churn in the working-class cities. It was embodied by groups such as The Clash and the Sex Pistols. Right around the same time, that rebellious music was already churning in the belly of the Lower East Side of Manhattan at a club called CBGB's. The sound would get its name from a New York City magazine called Punk. On Punk magazine's third issue, the cover story was about a group that had just put out their debut album on April 23, 1976. The group The Ramones started out playing at Performance Studio in New York City in the middle of 1974 with original members Jeffrey Hyman, a.k.a. Joey Ramone, John Cumming, a.k.a. Johnny Ramone, Douglas Colvin, a.k.a. Dee Dee Ramone, and Thomas Erdely, a.k.a. Tommy Ramone. They had been playing gigs at Max's Kansas City Club and also CBGB's, where they were seen by Hit Parader magazine's Lisa Robinson. She wrote an article on the group and then got former Stooges manager Danny Fields to become their manager. At 914 Sound Studio on September 19, 1975, the Ramones recorded 2 songs for their demo tape, Judy is a Punk and I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, both of which were produced by Marty Thau. Based on the strength of their demo, along with a major push by producer and Ramones cheerleader Craig Leone, who had heard the band play and fell in love with them, the Ramones were signed to Sire Records by President Seymour Stein, who was only going to release another song that they had just worked up, You're Gonna Kill That Girl. The Ramones said no. They wanted to put out an entire album. So Sire said yes, but at a really cheap price. Danny got Craig Leone, rather than Marty Thau, to produce their debut album. They used similar microphone placements during the recording of the album to the way that the Beatles recorded back in the early 1960s, with each instrument getting a separate microphone. They also did some overdubbing and doubled the vocals a lot. The only other musicians on the album were Joey Ramone's brother, Mikey Lee, and producer Craig Leone, who both did some percussion instruments, and also the album's engineer, Rob Freeman, who was doing background vocals on the song I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. The album was recorded in January of 1976 at Plaza Sound Studio, which was on the 8th floor of Radio City Music Hall. It had 14 songs on it, with topics ranging from drug use to violence to even Nazism. The most well-known song is probably Blitzkrieg Bop, which started out as a song about people having a good time at a concert and was originally called Animal Hop. Somewhere along the line, the group decided that it should be about Nazism and renamed the song. Beat on the Brat was about Joey Ramone wanting to beat up spoiled upper-class kids in his old neighborhood. Judy is a Punk is the shortest song at 1 minute 32 seconds and came to Joey as he passed by an apartment building where they would go up onto the roof and party. Joey also drew inspiration from the folk song There Was an Old Woman Who Swallowed a Fly. I Want to Be Your Boyfriend was the band's homage to romantic ballads and used a glockenspiel as well as tubular bells. Chainsaw is the fastest song on the album and is an homage to horror movies, specifically the popular horror movie at the moment, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, hence the circular saw at the beginning of the song. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue's title inspired the title of the punk fan magazine Sniffin' Glue, and while the song is about kids being bored and sniffing household products, the Ramones themselves weren't about that life, contrary to popular belief. I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement is the longest song on the album at 2 minutes 40 seconds and is another song that was inspired by horror movies. Fellow CBGB alum Debbie Harry of Blondie has also suggested that the song is about the basement at CBGB's, which I guess wasn't all that spectacular, to be nice about it. Loudmouth is a song that has 4 lines in it, or one long line depending on how you sing it. The song Havana Affair is a take on the old newspaper comic strip Spy vs. Spy. I remember that. That was a great comic strip. That song goes into Listen to My Heart, which is about a failing relationship. 53rd and Third was an autobiographical song that was written by Dee Dee Ramone and was about his time when he was younger as a male prostitute servicing other men on the corner of 53rd Street and 3rd Avenue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The line where he kills one of his customers so he can prove that he's not a homosexual is not autobiographical. At least, we don't think it is. He didn't seem like the guy to kill somebody. Anyway, the Ramones recorded Craig Leon playing the Wurlitzer pipe organ at Radio City Music Hall for the group's cover version of the 1962 Chris Montez classic Let's Dance. I Don't Want to Walk Around With You was one of their first songs that they wrote and was the first track on their demo tape. For whatever reason, it became the next to last track on the album. The last song, Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World, completes the Nazi theme that started with the first song, Blitzkrieg Bop, as it is about a kid in the Hitler youth groups. The song originally had lyrics that offended Seymour Stein so much that he threatened to not put the song on the album itself. The lyrics that ended up on the album version are the lyrics that they compromised on. And when you look at both versions of the lyrics, they don't actually seem that far apart, truthfully. The original lines were, quote, I'm a Nazi baby, I'm a Nazi, yes I am. I'm a Nazi Shotzi, you know I fight for the fatherland, end quote. While the compromised lines are, quote, I'm a shock trooper in a stupor, yes I am. I'm a Nazi Shotzi, you know I fight for the fatherland, end quote. Really not that much different, but, you know. The total runtime of the album is 29 minutes, 4 seconds, and most of the songs, except for songs like I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, are raw and fast. It was recorded in 7 days, 3 days for the instruments, 4 days to lay down all the vocals. The album cost $6,400 to make, mainly due to the budget that Sire gave them, but also because they really didn't need any more time or money than that. The front cover shot was photographed by Punk magazine photographer Roberta Bailey, who was paid $125 for the now iconic shot. The shot, which is also over-imitated in my opinion, is of the band in black leather jackets and torn blue jeans leaning up against a brick wall in Albert's Garden, which is a community garden between Bowery Street and 2nd Street in the Bowery section of Lower Manhattan. If you ever want to check it out, it does still exist, actually. The back cover is of an eagle belt buckle with the liner notes posted above it. The 2 singles that were officially released from the album were Blitzkrieg Bop, which was released in February 1976, and I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, which was released in September 1976. Both songs flopped, as did the album itself, which made it to number 111 on the Billboard Albums chart. Critically, though, the album was a huge hit, and over time became iconic, much like the band itself, who put out 14 albums in total before finally calling it quits in 1996. All of the original members are dead, unfortunately. Joey passed away from lymphoma in 2001. Dee Dee passed away from drug-related issues in 2002. Johnny passed away from prostate cancer in 2004, and Tommy was the last original member to pass away. He passed away from bile duct cancer in 2014. Producer Craig Leone, by the way, is, as of this recording, still alive. He moved over to England, and since 1998, he's been working on, of all things, classical music. Quite a far cry from his punk rock era. The debut album's influence is what makes the album number 33 on Rolling Stone magazine's greatest albums of all time list, along with a lot of other best of lists. First off, it announced punk rock music to the world, influenced grunge and later heavy metal, since Black Sabbath was already out by this time, and influenced The Clash and the Sex Pistols, focusing and fine-tuning the British punk rock scene into what it became. Some critics even said that the Ramones saved rock music from its bloated form at the time and brought it back to the basics. All I know is that the album and the group have taken on almost mythic proportions, with people still wearing Ramones t-shirts to make people think that they're cool. Of course, those are the same people who couldn't name more than 2 Ramones songs if their lives depended on it. But I digress. The debut album, The Ramones, by the legendary punk rock icons The Ramones, released on April 23rd, 1976. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. 254 West 54th Street in New York City has been many things over the decades. It started out as the Gallo Opera House, then the Casino de Paris, the WPA Federal Music Theater, the New Yorker Theater, then used as a TV Studio 52 for CBS, where it filmed shows such as Captain Kangaroo and Password. However, when you think of that address, you don't think of any of those things. Although Captain Kangaroo was an awesome kid show, I will die on that hill, just saying. No, instead of thinking about all that, you think about that brief 3-year period in the 1970s when that address became a modern-day Gomorrah. Studio 54, the nightclub, was started by Steve Rubel and Ian Schrager. Steve was the face of the club, you might say, the big ideas guy. Ian was the numbers guy, the gritty behind-the-scenes guy. Their idea was to make a no-holds-barred club with a mix of every type of person who would normally never be seen in a nightclub. Your usual college crowd, Wall Street, stockbroker types, they weren't going to cut it in this place. Not at all. What made the club so hot was a number of things. First was the door policy, where Rubel and a couple of doormen would hand-pick who would get in and who wouldn't. You would have drag queens partying it up some nights with preppies and celebrities. And second were those celebrities themselves, thanks to the Rolodex of promoter and fashion public relations manager Carmen D'Alessio. Michael Jackson, Elizabeth Taylor, Mick Jagger's jet-set wife Bianca Jagger, author Truman Capote, fashion designer Halston, artist Andy Warhol, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Grace Jones, Tommy Hilfiger were just some of the major celebrities that gave it its flamboyant style, you might say. Hamilton Jordan, who was White House Chief of Staff in the Carter administration during those years, famously created a scandal just for going there because they didn't think that somebody who was working at the White House should be seen in a place of ill repute, as they say. Oh, yeah, and also the Donald and his then-wife Ivanka Trump would show up and be regulars as well. Third were all the parties that they had there. No expense was ever spared for these outrageously outlandish events that became as legendary as the club itself. If it was a beach party, they would import sand. During one party, they brought in a horse. Bianca Jagger got up on it and rode around in the middle of the club for a brief amount of time. If there was an internet at that point in time, the photos from that moment would have broken it, because it certainly broke the social circles and the newspapers the very next day. The club was the epicenter for the disco scene. Artists from Gloria Gaynor to Donna Summer broke new records there. The band Chic was famously denied entry into the club when they were supposed to go there to meet the iconic Grace Jones. That led them to shout out the club and their experience in the song Le Freak, which became a huge hit. Studio 54 ran into trouble from the very beginning. They were shut down by the liquor authority because they never legally applied for a liquor license. They were using daily caterers' licenses to get around the law. They officially became a juice bar, but in reality, nothing really changed. People could still get their liquor along with cocaine and other drugs. Some of the staff were dealing drugs to the celebrities and non-celebrities alike. And there was also sex going on at the club. An awful lot of it, especially in the upper balconies. What ended up dooming Studio 54 wasn't any of that. Much like Al Capone, it was the tax evasion. Rubel and Schrager ended up in prison for a little over a year. Once out, they opened another hit club called the Palladium. Rubel passed away from complications from the AIDS virus on July 25, 1989. As for Schrager, he opened up a bunch of boutique hotels, which he still owns. He was also pardoned by President Barack Obama in 2017, just before Obama left office. The club shut down on February 4, 1980. To this day, I'm shocked that no other club anywhere, from New York to Miami to even Las Vegas, has tried some of the same things, from crazy nightly parties to an anything-goes atmosphere. Its name did live on, much like another New York City club, CBGB's, both in, of all places, Las Vegas. Studio 54 opened up in the MGM Grand Hotel in 1997 and stayed open until 2012, when it closed to make way for a new nightclub, the ever-popular EDM Vegas club Hakkasan. The iconic nightclub Studio 54, which opened its doors on April 26, 1977. Billy McFarland was born in New York City in 1991 and raised in New Jersey. He was the son of real estate developers and went to Bucknell University. He dropped out of school in his freshman year to pursue his business goals. The first company that he founded was an online advertising platform called Spling, which didn't last too long. In 2013, Billy co-founded the company Magnesis, which offered a members-only perks card, which gave the members VIP access to events, clubs, etc., etc. This is the point where rapper Ja Rule entered the chat, as Ja Rule met McFarland at those exclusive events with Magnesis. Within a few years, McFarland founded Fyre Media, which he said to investors had done $90 million in business, but according to court records, it had only done $60,000 in business. In order to promote Fyre Media and the Fyre music booking app that the company had come up with, McFarland decided to put on an exclusive luxury music festival called Fyre Fest. It was to be held in the Bahamas on an exclusive island with luxury accommodations and the usual "don't you wish you were us" attitude, and was going to be held on 2 weekends, April 28th through the 30th and May 5th through the 7th. Tickets ran between $500 to $1,500, with VIP packages running up to $12,000. With Ja Rule as one of its spokespeople, McFarland got to work. McFarland and Ja Rule flew to the Bahamas to check out some islands to stage the event. They ended up on an island called Norman's Cay, which used to be owned by former Medellin drug cartel higher-up Carlos Leder Rivas. McFarland and Ja Rule liked the island and leased it from the new owners at that time. The one thing that the island owners demanded was that McFarland and Ja Rule not use infamous former Medellin cartel boss Pablo Escobar's name in any advertisements. You had one job, McFarland. One job. Don't mention Pablo Escobar's name. Yeah, that didn't take. The promotion for the festival started off with a video that was put out, and it was actually filmed on Norman's Cay and featured models Emily Ratajkowski, Hailey Baldwin, Bella Hadid, and Kylie Jenner. On December 12, 2016, a few of the models, along with other Instagram influencers, posted a promotional video on their Instagram pages talking about how great the event was going to be, etc., etc., etc. These influencers will figure into the story much later, since they never mentioned to anybody that they actually got paid to post the video and that their posts were really advertisements. That was the beginning of the promotional blitz for the festival. McFarland's first big problem with organizing the festival came from his organization's own stupidity. Remember, you had one job, McFarland. Don't mention Pablo Escobar's name in the advertising. What's he do? He mentioned Pablo Escobar's name in the advertising, which is something that the owners of the island told him not to do, especially since it wasn't Pablo's old island. It was his underboss's old island. No matter, the owners canceled their deal with McFarland, and the festival had to go look for a new island. I still say that if he hadn't been so stupid as to mention Pablo's name, then he still might have been able to pull this whole thing off. Or maybe he and his crew still would have gone down the path they chose. Who knows? In any event, they had to look for a new island, and time was running out, as by now, opening day for this festival was only 4 months away. And as anybody with any sort of basic knowledge about putting together music festivals will tell you, it takes a lot longer than 4 months to do it properly, especially those luxury ones. There's a lot of logistics involved, everything from staging to security to medical services, everything in between all of that. Oh, and they now needed to find a place that had the necessary infrastructure to pull it off. Things like, electricity, bathroom stuff. Now, well, time to get to work. The first 2 months of the 4-month time period were spent with Private Island after Private Island turning them down. And then, with 2 months to go, they finally got permission to use a part of Great Exuma called Roker's Point, which the government had pushed to the side for development. It wasn't an island, but it was a part of one, and they were in an extreme time crunch, so they said yes. According to court records, they then altered their promotional materials to make it look like Roker's Point was its own island and not a part of one. Oh, and that it was also Pablo Escobar's private island, which, of course, again, was not true. When will these guys ever learn? In fact, Roker's Point was really, in reality, a parking lot in a resort development project that ran out of money and was located near a marina and the Sandals Emerald Bay Resort, as luck would have it. McFarland also started calling his parking lot Fyre K to give it that branding touch. It's all about the branding. McFarland needed a lot of cash quickly to pull this whole thing off, so one of his investors in the project arranged a $4 million loan for him. Did he spend it on the festival with the infrastructure and all that? Nope. He apparently spent a good chunk of it on pricey office digs in Manhattan. When McFarland finally went looking for festival organizers to do the logistics, He found out the hard way that it took at least $50 million to do this whole thing properly, before all the extra luxury stuff. Not $4 million, $50. For those of you keeping score, a festival cost $50 million. McFarland had $4 million, but spent a good chunk of that on office space. I'm sure it was in a great part of Manhattan. And he now was down to weeks to pull this off. No longer months, weeks. With the Fyre organization in disbelief that their festival was going to cost them $50 million, McFarland decided to try to cut some corners, like supposedly Googling how to put together a stage setup so that they could just do it themselves. McFarland allegedly took money out of the ticket deposits to take care of things like trying to get the bands, taking care of the infrastructure, the toilets, etc. They managed to sell 5,000 tickets and had hired a private air service to shuttle people back and forth from the main airport. It is worth noting a couple things at this point. At any point, McFarland could have decided that this was not going to work. It was going to cost way too much money, apologize to ticket holders, say that the festival was going to be postponed until maybe later in the year once hurricane season was over, and that would have at least bought him maybe 5 more months easily, probably even longer, to hire an events company to put on the festival and do it the right way. Instead, bro's gonna bro, as they say, and by that, I mean that McFarland and his crew were arrogant or thought that they were right and the experts were all wrong, or they were just in denial of their own stupidity about the way things were going. Doesn't matter. They continued on anyway. As one of them reportedly said, quote, "Let's just do it and be legends, man." End quote. Bro's gonna bro. The second point is that McFarland was still selling the Pablo Escobar Island lie, including trying to put nearby sand on the parking lot pavement to make it seem like it was a beach. Like that ever worked. Problem was, event industry people were finally beginning to take notice about what was really going on. Fyre Fest had at least 20 big-named artists that were going to perform, and one by one, they all canceled. The $6 million luxury food caterer for the event also canceled. To save money, they hired another caterer for $1 million, but the food for an event of that size for $1 million is not exactly luxurious. Finally, with 1 month to go, that's 4 weeks, they hired event producer Yaron Lavie, who again told them to postpone the event until later in the year. When McFarland said that he wouldn't, Lavie told him to forget about the luxury villas and go with the large tents. He also said to tell the VIP ticket holders about all these changes and accommodations, but apparently there was some miscommunication. No emails got sent out to the people, whatever. They never knew. There was one last monetary lifeline that might have saved the day. Comcast Ventures was going to invest $25 million in McFarland's Fyre app, but something spooked the company into not investing. And that was it. McFarland was done. Game over. Yeah, right. Not quite. After the original funds had been burned through and his Comcast Ventures deal had fallen through, and while he was going through the ticket holders' deposit money, McFarland got a final lifeline. He managed to get a $3 million temporary loan from investor Ezra Birnbaum with the stipulation that $500,000 of it be paid back in the first 16 days. While this was going on, McFarland was telling ticket holders that the festival was cashless and that they would need to load up money somewhere between $300 to $500 for every day that they were going to be at the festival on what McFarland and the crew called a Fyre band that was linked to their credit cards. The problem with trying to pay for things this way at the festival was that there was little to no Wi-Fi, so it was a useless thing. What it did do, though, was that it helped to raise $4 million of accessible funds that, according to the lawsuit that Ezra Birnbaum filed, McFarlane used part of in order to pay off that temporary loan that he had. With the festival date of April 28th approaching, things were unraveling pretty fast. The day before, the festival site experienced heavy rains, which does happen on the island sometimes. You remember that idea earlier about getting big tents for the luxury accommodations? McFarlane actually listened to that idea and got them. And here's where the bro attitude of, quote, "we know what we're doing because we know more than the guys who do this for a living," end quote, kicks back in. The group stored the tents outside, figuring, I guess, that it wasn't going to rain. Well, it rained, and it soaked the tents to the point where they were unusable. Money wasted, no luxury accommodations, and no time to get new ones. That was the day before the festival opened. Meanwhile, the first flights from the mainland to the islands came in at 6:20 a.m. on April 28th. While organizers distracted the ticket holders by giving them tons of alcohol and throwing an impromptu beach party, workers were trying to finish what they could while organizers were trying to renegotiate entertainment guaranteed money because the festival had run out of money to pay the artists. The final straw for that little part of it was when Blink-182 smelled a rat and canceled the day of their performance. That was the last big act to cancel. The later arrivals to the island were taken to the festival site by a school bus. It was at that time that the full extent of the disaster became known. The luxury tents were FEMA-style disaster relief tents with soaked beds that they had also left out in that rainstorm I talked about earlier. The food were things like cheese sandwiches. Not exactly the fine cuisine that people paid for, although I loves me a cheese sandwich. Yummy. The portable toilet situation? Oh boy, that was bad. There was no lighting, no cell phone service, and there was not even remotely close to having adequate medical services. Local bands ended up playing the festival instead of the big-name artists that people put out a good chunk of money to go see. Some people tried to get accommodations elsewhere on the island, but there was another big event happening on the island, so all of the other hotels were booked up, including that nearby Sandals resort. Finally, the next morning on April 29th, McFarlane gave in and said that the festival was being postponed and that arrangements were going to be made to get people off the island and back to the mainland. The people who found flights leaving overnight on the 29th found those flights canceled after the Bahamian government shut down the airport for the night for whatever reason. Who knows? That left passengers stranded and locked in the airport terminal with no food or water, plus no air conditioning, which, if you've ever been on a Caribbean island with no air conditioning, oh boy. Later in the day, flights started going back and forth to get people off the island. So, what happened to everybody involved? Well, let's start with those models and influencers that I spoke about before. See, once things went sideways, some of them tried to delete their posts about the festival, especially once it came out that they had been paid a lot of money to promote it, but didn't tell their followers that they were getting paid. Even though Kylie Jenner had put the hashtag ad on her post, the Federal Trade Commission determined that it wasn't enough to have only put that in the post. So a lot of these influencers had to pay a fine of not a whole lot of money, all things considered. Personally, anytime I see someone talking about a product or software or whatever, I assume that they're automatically just getting paid to promote it. At the very least, they probably got a free copy to promote or review, and if they want to keep getting free stuff, they need to give really nice reviews. Makes me not trust anyone, especially on YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram, but I digress. Then, there were the two main pieces to this puzzle. Let's start with Ja Rule. He was sued along with McFarland in multiple multi-million-dollar lawsuits, not just one, multiple ones, including a $100 million class action lawsuit. Ja Rule claimed that he never knew what was going on and that he had been duped by McFarland like everybody else was. Eventually, he escaped criminal charges and the class action lawsuit, since it was determined that his involvement was posting about the festival on social media and nothing more. This after he reportedly said in a post, quote, "I wanted this to be an amazing event. It was not a scam, as everyone is reporting. I don't know how everything went so left, but I'm working to make it right by making sure everyone is refunded," end quote. He also said, quote, "I truly apologize as this is not my fault, but I'm taking responsibility," end quote. He is out there today promoting his career and other business ventures. McFarland, though, wasn't so lucky. Along with all those lawsuits, he also ended up with a criminal charge of 1 count of wire fraud. McFarland lost his original lawyer because he couldn't pay the law firm. He was represented by a public defender at his bail hearing and released on $300,000 bail. Sentencing guidelines stated that he should spend 4 years and 9 months in prison. However, McFarland was never one who half-assed anything, because while he was out on bail, according to court records, he started a new ticketing scheme called NYC VIP Access, with which he was selling fake tickets to things like Burning Man, Coachella, and the extremely private guest list only fashion event, the Met Gala. He was also taped doing this for some reason, so he got hit with those charges as well. In the end, McFarland pled guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison in order to pay $26 million. Fyre Media, Magnesis, and their directors also had to fork over multi-millions of dollars. McFarland entered prison on October 11, 2018, got into trouble for trying to write a book using voice notes, but was released from prison on March 30th, 2022, and spent 6 more months under house arrest until he was officially released in September of 2022, having spent just over 4 years of his 6-year sentence. All right, so that's it. End of the story. The disastrous Fyre Fest. No. That's not even the end of the story. Like I said, bro's gonna bro. See, right after he got out of prison, he announced a new venture called PYRT Technologies, which was another event experience company. A man by the name of Jonathan Taylor later filed a lawsuit stating that he was promised 1/3 equity in the new venture, but the agreement wasn't lived up to and the investment wasn't given back. McFarland also dabbled in politics for the 2024 election, as he was part of President Donald Trump's outreach to get rappers to endorse his campaign and not Joe Biden/Kamala Harris's. Then, in April of 2023, McFarland announced that he was putting together Fyre Fest 2 Electric Boogaloo. Since then, the dates and locations have changed, starting with the Caribbean and moving to parts of Mexico, with every local government stating that either no one has filed any permit paperwork or that the festival wasn't welcome there, especially in the Bahamas, where McFarland is still actually considered to be a fugitive from the laws of justice. The latest date was supposedly May 30th, 2025, in Quintana Roo, Mexico. That would be the Mexican state where Cancun and Tulum are located, with non-refundable ticket prices of, get this, up to $1 million. Yeah, I said non-refundable. Quintana Roo's government has also said that there has been no permit paperwork filed. The last location mentioned as of this recording is a small island off the coast of Cancun. Stay tuned, because they're still saying that they have permits and the governments are saying that they don't have permits, and they're still hunting for a place. Oh, by the way, May 30th, as of this recording, just over a month. Really, we're just going to repeat this whole stupid experience one more time. Would you even buy a non-refundable ticket for this festival, knowing the history and the guy running it? I'm telling you, bro's gonna bro. The disastrous Fyre Fest, which started on April 28th, 2017. Time for some honorable mentions. First, let's celebrate some birthdays and talk about 3 legends whose birthdays are this week. There are some people in entertainment who become legends in one field. There are some who get really good in 2 fields. Anything more than that, and you get into mythical status. Allow me to remind you of the greatness of this next mythical being. This person was born on April 24th, 1942. She is a star in music, movies, television, and theater. She is a singer, songwriter, actress, screenwriter, director, producer, and composer. She is one of the biggest selling female artists of all time, with 150 million copies sold and counting. She has 10 Grammy Awards, as well as a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award and a Legends Grammy Award. She held the record for the most top 10 albums by a female at 34, and also the most #1 albums by a female at 11. If both of those records haven't been broken by now, I know of 2 women who are really on track to break them real soon. She is also the only artist to have a #1 album in each of the last 6 decades. She has 53 gold albums, 31 platinum albums, and 14 multi-platinum albums to her credit. She began her career on Broadway, while also making appearances on The Tonight Show and also in nightclubs. In 1963, she released her first 2 albums, which led to her starring role in the Broadway production of Funny Girl. She also starred in the movie version of the musical, which won her the Best Actress Oscar that year. She actually tied with Katharine Hepburn that year, one of the few times that there was a tie for an Academy Award. As far as television goes, she has 5 Emmy Awards. Her first TV special premiered on April 28, 1965. She was given so much creative control that she performed every song herself and with no guest stars, and the special became a ratings smash. She followed that up with 2 more TV specials. When it comes to movies, there's really no equal. She won 2 Academy Awards, one for being the first female to win for Best Original Song. That would be for Evergreen from the 3rd version of A Star is Born, possibly the 2nd, I forget. She's also the first woman to win a Golden Globe Award for Best Director and the first woman to star, direct, write, and produce the exact same movie. That movie, by the way, Yentl, back in 1983. All totaled, to go with her 10 Grammys, 5 Emmys, and 2 Oscars, she has a special Tony Award, 4 Peabody Awards, a Kennedy Center Honor, an American Film Institute Award, 9 Golden Globes, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Not bad for a kid from Brooklyn. She is the iconic Miss Barbra Streisand, who was born on April 24th, 1942. This next woman was born in 1917 in Virginia. Her life had a very humbling beginning. Despite all the hardships, though, including stints in juvenile hall, her exceptional voice and unwavering determination propelled her to the pinnacle of jazz. She, of course, is Miss Ella Fitzgerald. Ella performed at her first amateur hour at the legendary Apollo Theater in New York City on November 21st, 1934, at the age of 17. At that time, Ella was slated to dance during amateur hour. However, there was another dance act called the Edwards Sisters who were really good. Ella was actually intimidated by them, so instead of dancing, she sang 2 songs. She won amateur night that night, and a legendary singing career was born. First prize that night was $25. That works out to $578.97 in today's money. After her win at the Apollo, Ella's career skyrocketed. She joined the Chick Webb Orchestra, rising to become their lead vocalist. The band's success brought Fitzgerald national recognition, and her signature song, A Tisket, a Tasket, became a timeless favorite and is also in the Grammy Hall of Fame. As Fitzgerald carved her own path, she collaborated with jazz legends such as Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Dizzy Gillespie. Throughout her career, she won 14 Grammy Awards and sold over 40 million albums, solidifying her place as an icon. She also won a Presidential Medal of Freedom and a National Medal of the Arts. Her vocal talents, especially with phrasing, continue to influence singers to this very day. The iconic singer, Miss Ella Fitzgerald, born on April 25th, 1917. This next legend is an activist, actor, poet, and author, as well as being great at his main jobs of being a singer-songwriter. He is one of the legends of country music, known for his outlaw lifestyle and long hair. His most recognizable albums are Shotgun Willie, Red-Headed Stranger, and Stardust. He wrote the country music classics Crazy and Funny How Time Slips Away. He had a popular duet called To All the Girls I've Loved Before with Julio Iglesias. That would be Enrique Iglesias' father, for those of you too young to remember that. He was part of the supergroup The Highwaymen with Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson. He has won 12 Grammy Awards and was recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He is also an activist for legalizing marijuana and for the use of biofuels. He is the red-headed stranger himself, Mr. Willie Nelson, who was born on April 29th, 1933. Let's finish up the honorable mentions this week with some technology and some Broadway. First, back in the early 2000s, Napster had taken hold of the music industry and threatened to take it down, or at least to make it extremely unprofitable for both record labels and artists. The record labels tried scaring their customers into paying overinflated prices for CDs and singles, but that only made people resent both the labels and artists like Metallica and Dr. Dre, who were all fighting against Napster. Enter Apple CEO Steve Jobs, who saw an opening and, of course, an opportunity. He famously got all of the record company heads together and explained the rules of the road to them. The first rule was that technology was going to win. People found that it was obviously more convenient to carry around one device that played millions of songs instead of a briefcase full of cassettes and CDs. Do you know I still actually have my briefcase full of cassettes? It's kind of scary, but I still have it. The second rule was that if record labels wanted to continue to be in business, they should open up a record store online and start selling their songs and albums in the new extremely popular MP3 format. Jobs would, of course, take a nice little profit percentage for it. Nothing personal, strictly business. On April 28, 2003, the culmination of that effort paid off when the iTunes Store premiered. It was originally on Macintosh. Then, later in the year, it went over to Windows. Since that time, books, videos, and now podcasts like this one have been added to the store. iTunes changed the retail landscape. It's led to new business models like streaming services such as Spotify and Netflix. It has saved some industries like record labels but killed others like record stores. The convenience factor cannot be denied, though, and it is one of Steve Jobs' least celebrated achievements in a very stellar business career. It's understandable, though, when you consider that some of his other business achievements were the iPod, the iPad, the Apple II computer, the iMac, Pixar, and the iPhone. The first day of the iTunes Store, April 28th, 2003. Finally, the trio of Jerome Ragney, James Radu, and Galt McDermott wrote a musical about a group of hippies. They referenced drug use, hippie counterculturalism, sexuality, and nudity. These were not exactly normal fare for a Broadway musical, so it was pretty controversial, to say the least. Then again, this was the 1960s. Everything was controversial. The musical went on to become a huge hit, with a few of the songs, like Aquarius and Good Morning Sunshine, becoming hits on the pop charts. The musical is Hair, which premiered on Broadway at the Biltmore Theater on April 29th, 1968. And that is it for this overextended version of the Music History In-Depth podcast for April 23rd through the 29th. Thank you very, very much for sticking around, listening, and or watching if you have this on YouTube or Spotify.